Good afternoon. Welcome to the Road to Integration, Building Welcoming and Inclusive Environments. I am Gabriella McDonald. I am the Deputy Director at Texas Appleseed, and I'm really glad to have you all with us for our fourth and final installation of our Road to Integration series. We at Texas Appleseed, New York Appleseed, and the Appleseed Network have put on this series in conjunction with some work that we're doing around integration in both Texas and New York. In New York, they've been working on the issue of school integration for a long time now, and they have kind of a head start on Texas's work as we think about what it really means to describe and quantify segregation in Texas, and how we will prepare communities to start to talk really in depth about integration, true integration in a new and hopefully fruitful way. And so we're really glad to have you here, and this webinar series is contributing to that work. And we're really looking forward to having the discussion that we will have today, where we've got community members and youth from both Texas and New York to talk about what integration means to them and what it really takes to make a school environment that is actually welcoming and inclusive and truly integrated, not in the traditional sense in which we think of integration, where there's busing involved and people are forced to go to outside of their communities to get the education that they need, but what it really means to provide integrated, supportive education in everybody's community. And so just to tell you guys a little bit about the previous webinar series, the previous webinars in this series, we've had 3 others of them, as you can guess, since this is the 4th one. Our first one was the Road to Integration, School Segregation, and the Ongoing Fight for Racial Equality. We had Dr. Jennifer Holm from UT and youth from Integrate NYC who were really able to lay the basis of talking about these issues and really talking about what it truly takes to integrate through Integrate NYC's definition with the 5R framework, which you'll hear more about in a moment. The second one was how housing and land use policies impact school segregation. And it really allowed us to do a deep dive discussion about the fact that neighborhood segregation and school segregation go hand in hand. And our neighborhood segregation, along with school segregation, has been so purposeful on the policy level. And we're really going to have to purposefully undo the segregation that we have had in our policies traditionally over the last forever. And then third on our discussion we had was challenging modern tactics of school segregation, where we had Richard and Leah Rothstein come and talk to us from their book, Just Action, and what it truly takes to actually integrate schools and that what that action looks like, the barriers people encounter, how to overcome some of those barriers, and just really putting into action what the words and discussions we've been having are. And then finally, we're going to have the discussion that we have today. But before we do that, Texas and New York Appleseed both want to kind of talk a little bit more ground setting. And we'll start with just Appleseed's definition of integration. And I'll throw it to Naya from New York Appleseed to do that.
Amazing. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everyone. As she just said, my name is Naya Berg. I am the Executive Director at New York Appleseed. And our mission and vision is defined by the 5 R's of Real Integration framework. We advocate for integrated schools and communities by defining integration through these 5 R's. These 5 R's, however, were not solely created by us. They were created by students that later became part of the student-led advocacy group, Integrate NYC, which some of the guests that we have today have been part of that, and we're part of the building of the 5 R's. But what do we mean when we talk about integration? So the 5 R's is a holistic vision of integration. It means more than moving bodies. We have race and enrollment. So integrated schools are ones that are not only diverse in student composition, be it by race, socioeconomic status, et cetera, but they also are ones that employ restorative justice practices to make sure that we're not punitively disciplining our youth and not contributing to the school to prison pipeline. We also want to make sure that they are schools that have an equitable allocation of resources. So that there are equitable allocation of opportunities, investments, extracurriculars, AP classes, what have you, and funding, of course. We also, one of the Next, R's would be representation. So integrated schools are ones that also have a diverse staff and faculty that's reflective of the student body. And then last but certainly not least is relationships. So once students are within a school and the school is desegregated, the job doesn't end there. How are we ensuring that relationships are being fostered and created across difference? And usually that looks like advocating for culturally responsive education, culturally responsive teaching, curriculum, books, you name it. Those five R's are what make up our definition of school integration and what we mean by advocating for integrated schools.
Excellent. Thank you, Naya.
Of
And
course.
so in doing this work, Texas has actually been doing the quantification of segregation and what that looks like in Texas. In order to do that, we decided to work on a research paper that focused on a singular community and the county surrounding areas of the community to really talk about what that housing segregation and school segregation looks like and talk to the community about what they are seeing and how they're feeling in their own school environment. So we not only did qualitative and quantitative research, but we also did, historical background research on the community. And so the area that we decided to work on was Beaumont, Texas. It's a place kind of near the coast on the southeast side of Texas, and our large state. And we actually were able to have interviews with students. We had two focus groups with teachers and a focus group with the community, in addition to pulling all of the data that we could surrounding the way that the schools are made up and that the neighborhoods are made up, and analyzing that and discussing that. And out of that, we hope to not only produce a report, but produce a way for people to start to really be truthful in their historical understanding of what segregation has looked like in their community, so that they can truly understand what it takes to undo all of that. And so New York, I'll throw it back to Naya to talk about what you guys have been doing.
Thanks. And then on our end, we use the 5 Rs in thinking about creating a community conversation series. So we had a 5-part workshop series between 7 to 10 participants, the same participants each time. So we could go in depth into all of the history of school integration that's happened across New York City public schools, addressing school segregation, and then also went through what it means to go through a process of diversity planning, how to define integration within their school community, essentially giving all the tools and resources that we have developed and also learned about throughout the years back to the community so they can bring it back to their community by word of mouth, but also by learning. And that has created a community conversations toolkit, which we are hopefully releasing this week for people to be able to have a self-guided workshop series on what it means to truly integrate their schools. And bringing these two, sort of bridging these two projects together through both what Texas had did with their research report and also what we did with the community conversation series has been this webinar series, as well as some of the findings from our different reports. So one, for example, we had 3 very sort of similar findings through both of one with community actions and 2 with their research. 3 different things that popped up were guidance counselors and social workers and the importance of them. That there are too few counselors to meet their needs. The second one was funding disparities in all types. And for New York, it came up with how we're funding our schools, why we're funding them that way. In Texas, it was also, again, a myriad of different ways that funding can impact schooling, from textbooks to extracurriculars to teacher pay. And then last but certainly not least was restorative justice and mental health. And those were continually connected between the lived experiences of both those that were interviewed in Texas and those that are part of the community the conversation series in New York. Again, it was brought up the need for counselors, as well as the need to continue to make sure we're not policing our students and making them feel like criminals when they step through school walls. And a lot of folks in New York talked about metal detectors, for example. And last but not least, I want to say that one theme that also really connected both of our projects was that the solutions have to be holistic. And I think that makes the most sense with understanding that our 5 R's framework is a holistic way of defining integration, so that our solutions must also be holistic in their creation. And I think that was a great way to bridge those two projects together. But I'm also really excited to turn it over to the stars of this webinar, so that we're bridging it not only through our research, but also through the lived experiences of those that are part of these projects.
Totally, Naya. I agree. And so at this point in time, I'd love to invite the rest of our guests for our panel to have this discussion to join us on screen. And then I will throw it to each of you to introduce yourselves for a moment, and then we will get our discussion started. So why don't we start with Cade?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cadence Carter, or Cade for short. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a trans youth advocate and all-around queer activist based in the Houston area. I was recently featured in an article written by Miranda Dunlap and published by the Houston Landing, in which I share my experience being a trans student in the KDISD school district and why I ended up unenrolling after they passed a harmful transphobic policy that would force teachers to out their students as trans and possibly put them in dangerous situations in households with non-accepting families. I make it my goal to speak up for those of us in the queer community who aren't out of the closet or otherwise can't speak up for themselves. I'm currently working on putting together a nonprofit organization that would seek to protect trans youth, the trans youth of Texas, and combat these harmful school policies like the ones that pushed me out of the school system.
Thank you so much, Cade. And Annette?
Hi, everyone. My name is Annette. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the Youth Justice Coordinator at NYU's Education Justice Research and Organizing Collaborative, EJ-ROC for short, at the Metro Center. Prior to that, I worked at Integrate NYC. I started as a student organizer when I was a junior in high school and was part of the first youth leadership team that wrote the 5 R's.
Thank you so much. Angel?
Hello, everyone. My name is Angel Jackson, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am born and raised Houston Texan. I'm currently a community organizer as well as a youth justice fellow for the Texas Appleseed. I'm also a person with lived experience, as well as I'm a mom to a school-age child. So I'm super excited to be a part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much. Benji?
Hey everyone, my name is Benji Weiss, he, him, his. I'm a junior in high school in New York City. I'm a former member of Integrate NYC. I currently do some work with EJ-ROC and Appleseed, and I'm a plaintiff on Integrate NYC v. New York.
Fantastic. And Anita?
Dang, these people are impressive. Hi, everyone. My name's Anita. I had the pleasure of meeting Cade when he was a student in my classroom. And I am descended from grandparents who were refugees from what is now Pakistan to India during the partition. And that shaped a lot of my identity and experiences with internalized racism and kind of not discussing conflict or harm, growing up with that generational trauma. And so I started teaching in 2001. And part of my mission is I'm interested in restorative justice, but for me, it's an internal journey of restoring healing for myself and also for community and restoring healing with the institution of schooling. So I've been an educator, assistant principal, teacher, restorative justice coordinator for 17 years. And now I'm trying to work outside of the system. It's been a very oppressive experience, especially in Houston and in Texas. And so I am going to start a new nonprofit called Restorative Houston. And our mission is to create a restorative city and a cohort of intergenerational cohort of restorative justice practitioners to try to transform systems. And I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you all. And you're right, Anita, this group is fantastically impressive, and I'm really glad to be here with you all. And so my first question for you all is, what does integration mean to you? And feel free to start wherever you are, but if I don't have anybody who picks it up, I'll just call somebody. Maybe we'll start with the Integrate NYC members or former members. So Benji or Annette, do you guys have thoughts on this?
Sure, I can start us off and I'll pass it to Benji. I think, well, integration, like in its definition, like y'all said, the 5 R's. But to go more into that, I think for me, like within the school context, integration means that students are being treated as whole human beings. A lot of my school experience didn't feel like that, and I know students still feel that. And yeah, that like students' needs are met and are seen as important and not ignored. And it would mean that all students are getting the resources that they need to succeed, and that they feel safe and celebrated in their schools, right? That the teachers are getting paid fairly and are receiving cultural competency training. But yeah, like it being a space where students are able to thrive as human beings, and not just somewhere they have to like go and feel like they have to do what they have to do to survive.
Yeah, for me, integration. I mean, it aligns with the 5 R's, but I think that specifically also means just like giving students what they need and what they want, and giving them the tools to succeed in schools. And I think that's really what the 5 R's are about. It's about meeting every student where they are when they walk in the door, and treating every student as a person who can grow, and ensuring that every student has the resources and the environment that they need to grow and become the best kind of person that they can be. And I think that going a little further than the 5 R's, it also means giving students a forum to really become citizens of their communities, and giving students the resources that they need to make change in their school and outside of their school, and allowing students to see themselves as change makers, and having the ability to really enact change and be members of a democratic society.
Awesome. Other thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to piggyback off it. I think that for me, integration at its like lowest form means opportunity. Because I don't think that when you enter the school like system, you're thinking about you expressing yourself and doing a lot of things. You're more so looking like you school helps you identify some of your identity. You're going there, you're expecting to just learn, and you come in open and honest. And I think that school has a place where it's supposed to give you that opportunity in any community that you in to experience new things, because that's usually what school is for. Like you usually learn new things. My son, he's young, he's in elementary, and he comes home excited a lot of times about them doing projects that I probably could never do, because like I'm not into certain things. But I think for me, school at its basis is a space that should be welcome for opportunity, learning, and growth, and learning more about yourself and your identity.
I love all of that. I think that's great. Anybody else want to input on this question?
I think to me, integration, at least the most important parts of integration, is giving students the resources they need to be able to succeed. And not only that, but allowing them the spaces and resources they need to handle things outside of education so that they can focus on their education. Whereas if in a school where students aren't provided with these resources that they might need, they can't focus on their education. Their focus is getting these resources or making their own lives easier. Whereas if we use our resources to help make students' lives easier, they can have their main focus on education. When we give students representation and resources, they can put the majority of their focus on what is most important, which should be their education in a school setting.
Love that.
I really like that too. I had written a definition, but no, I'm not going to read that. I like what everyone else is saying a lot better. What I like is, there's this field of medicine, integrative medicine, which is kind of an alternative to traditional medicine, where it's bringing together different pieces to provide healing. And I feel like normally we think of integration as bringing people of different races together. And I have in my definition, honoring people's different identities and making sure we all feel seen and valued. But I like the idea of integrating also the different aspects of who we are. So integrating our mind with our body, with our heart, because a lot of the skills that I try to teach are things like checking in, social bonds, self-regulation, because these are what are called the soft skills. But I think vulnerability, being able to manage conflict, I think these are really hard skills that need to be literally integrated into the curriculum. And that includes things like cultural competency, identity, with systems of oppression. So I think integration involves integrating a whole bunch of components of what we think of as schooling, maybe beyond what it is right now, which really feels standardized test based.
Incredible. And so that actually brings me to my next point, which is a little bit more groundwork laying. And that is, what do schools kind of look like in Texas and New York now? How are they operating now as compared to what we might want to see? And anybody feel free to jump in.
Well, in Texas right now, a lot of school districts are passing policies that would honestly hurt the student body more than it would help the student body. A bunch of schools are attempting to pass policies that would restrict students' abilities to form a GSA club, which is a Gender Sexuality Alliance club, where queer students can build community and speak about their experiences. A bunch of schools are attempting to get rid of, I believe HISD is attempting to get rid of libraries and replace them with discipline centers instead of having a library, which should be a center of learning, a place where you can educate yourself. Instead, we are replacing them with discipline centers. I think that right now, schools could do a lot better. Schools could make students feel accepted and help them, because right now a lot of the policies that they're passing is making students feel like their own existence is taboo, that they are something to be hidden away, that GSA clubs and other queer students, they're things that should be hidden away, things that shouldn't be allowed to be in public, that this is something you keep behind closed doors. Whereas I feel like school districts could do a lot better at helping students feel good about themselves and helping students accept themselves as well as their peers.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Cade said, having seen it up close, obviously losing him within only weeks or a few months at the beginning of class. So I have a similar experience, but I also have two daughters in the Houston Independent School District, which was taken over by the state. This past year, we have an unelected school board that was appointed by the governor. We have a superintendent that was appointed. He was actually the head of a charter network that now advertises to recruit teachers in Houston while I'm shopping at Value Village. But yet he is firing teachers and firing principals. And it's basically like a teacher to mental health crisis pipeline is what is happening. A lot of us are being driven out of the profession, I think by design, because there are ways that you can monetize what's happening. There's a $32 billion surplus in the state of Texas that is being held hostage because our governor wants vouchers. And there's less accountability for charter schools than there are for public schools. So Kate is right. They have closed libraries and turned them into what they call team centers, where students are sent if they're punished. Obviously, you could have both. You wouldn't have to, but they have fired librarians. They've been dismissed as people who just check out books. There's another local school district that had to fire all librarians because of the budget crisis. Our superintendent has no qualms about being really dismissive about students in low performing Black and brown schools. And so when you talk about integration, the school down the street where my daughters go is very racially integrated, but completely tracked And there's completely opportunity gaps, even based on the way things are celebrated, or giving status to kids whose parents can pay $2,500 for the PTO and giving them physical gifts in front of other students. So while you have people of different races in the same building, that is obviously not having people feeling celebrated or seen or valued in the same way. So that's kind of the state of Texas right now, is everything being fueled by a test score.
And what does New York look like right now? Oh, sorry, Angel, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I wanted to add on because my son attends a charter school, and I've noticed the influx of them into my community because I live like in the Black and Brown community where they don't have the same accountability. Like I have a bunch of times had to rally some of the parents together in order for us to even get like emails about basic communication. I feel like what's happening in Texas is they definitely are trying to silence parents. We are not in the know. We're not informed. And if you don't have the time, the resources to access information, you are left in the dust. And I think that that's done on purpose. Absolutely. I think that the shift that's happening with the standardized test, because my son is on the spectrum, it isn't, it doesn't like play give a youth with some type of autism an opportunity to really be represented, because those are just, in order for you to get funding. So my son's school doesn't even have, they don't employ a counselor nor a nurse, which I didn't even know you could even do that in order to run a school. So there are things that I've been learning about these charter schools as opposed to like a regular funded HISD school. And I've definitely seen an influx in the lottery. Well, I had to put my son in the lottery in order for him to have an opportunity to be at a school that's more funded or more supported, that is more selective. When we talk about integration, it's like they are integrating individuals selectively, like depending on your test scores and your resources and how involved your parents can be in certain environments. And I think that it's definitely hurting our children because they're not understanding what's happening. And us as parents, we have to continue to really stand for our children and advocate for them.
Thank you all for that background on Texas. New York, do you all have thoughts on what New York schools are looking like right now?
Yeah, I would like to plus one Angel's statement on standardized testing. These tests have been proven to not really test like intelligence or anything, right? And not actually help students learn. Yet we still have them. During the pandemic, it further showed that these tests weren't necessary and somehow they were brought back, right? And so I think that's a huge problem that both of our states are facing, and other states in the country. Something that recently also happened in New York City was that mayoral control was extended for another 2 years, which is something that community organizers, parents, and students have strongly been advocating and organizing against. And that, I don't even know how to go into all of the reasons why that is such like a problem for students and for public schools in New York City. But there's no way that like it basically says that like a one size fits all will work for all schools, right? And that has been proven to also not work, when communities should have control to be able to choose what their school needs the most, right? Because every school looks different. Every school is going to need different resources, is going to need different things. And I think that further takes away youth voice and youth power, which we have been like since Benji and I have been an Integrate NYC, right? Like, and even before that, like we've been fighting so hard to be able to have youth power and youth voice in these conversations, in these spaces. And it takes us one step further from that, right? To like once again have 2 more years of mayoral control where there's no space for that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that mayoral control and standardized testing are two huge issues that are facing schools in New York City right now, especially with standardized testing and APs and advanced placement programs. I think are really harming education today, especially at the high school level, where these APs and these standardized tests and all this standardized curricula are really harming education. It really boils education down to memorize this and spit this information out on the test instead of allowing education to be what it should be about, which is critical thinking and questioning the world around us and becoming change makers. So I think that definitely right now all this standardization is really harming schools. And I think that also in New York City we're dealing with a administration that just isn't open to public schools. We're dealing with a mayor, we're dealing with a chancellor who just do not care about public schools, and they're fine taking hundreds of millions of dollars away from public schools. They are fine ignoring the issues of public schools. Meanwhile, schools in New York City continue to face massive funding gaps, and also just a bunch of other issues, including standardized testing and just a lack of really grassroots say in our schools.
Something I heard several of you mention is really youth voice. And I know, Anita, you've talked about teacher voice and the ability to speak up about what your needs are in school. And so I'm just wondering if you all want to speak to youth voice and being able to speak up about what your needs are and how that works, and how that would make you guys feel more supported, and create an inclusive environment for you all.
As a student in KDISD, I feel like, again, the system, the KDISD policies are making students feel like their existence is taboo. When you walk into the library and you see someone boxing up a bunch of books because they have people in them who are like you, and you get the message that, oh, people like you cannot be seen. People like you can't be on the shelves. People like you can't be the main character in a story. People like you are not the ones who everyone's rooting for. When you walk into a library and you see your existence in a box being taken away because people have decided that content that includes people like you are not appropriate for school settings, it sends a message to kids. It sends a message to students like me that we are not cared about as much as the other students are.
Could I ask Kate a question following up on that?
This is a conversation, so go for it.
Yeah. Kate, do you think there is a disconnect between what the lawmakers and the school board are doing and their philosophy around things like book bans and how the teachers in the building interacted with you, or was there overlap?
I definitely think that teachers and faculty are more sympathetic towards the students and people who these policies affect, whereas on a government level, with like the governor or even just the school board, I feel like the majority of them have already made up their mind on what they feel about what specific topics. When KDISD was first put out this policy that they were going to vote on, hundreds of people showed up to tell them that these policies weren't a good idea, that these policies were harmful, that these policies were going to contribute to the suicide rate in queer students and queer youth. I'd say there were like over 100 people who showed up there to tell them it wasn't a good idea, and 7 people who showed up to agree with them. And yet it felt like they'd already had their minds made up, because after all was said and done, after all those people spoke their heart and soul and their experiences to these people, they still voted to pass this policy that would harm all these people who came to tell them how this policy would harm them and their friends and their families and their communities. I feel like when it comes to the school board and it comes to higher government, I feel like they've already decided how they feel about certain issues, whereas I feel like individual people, whether it be teachers or staff or faculty, don't want to have to do what these policies say. They don't want to have to misgender kids. They don't want to have to dead name kids. They don't want to have to out kids to family members who could be abusive or hostile towards them due to their identity. But a lot of the times their hands are tied because of these policies. And I feel like teachers, librarians, the people who actually interact with these students, who see them as they are the people who are being silenced the most, along with the students, because of the school boards making these decisions.
So, and that speaks to one of the 5 R's, which is representation, right? So it's not just when we talk about representation, we're talking about representation of seeing a student body, teachers, counselors, administrators, school board members who look like you and who reflect you, but also seeing yourself represented in the curriculum. And I'm just wondering if y'all have thoughts about representation overall, both types, how you're seeing, how you would like to see it, or how it's not showing up, or how it should be showing up.
Well, it seems like there's a very big similarity between Texas schools and New York City schools, where in New York City right now, we're also dealing with government officials that just do not care about students and do not care about community activists, and don't really care about like doing what is best for the people inside schools. They already have their minds made up about whatever policies they want to enact. So I think that there's a big issue going on here where students especially are not being represented in positions of power, and and there just isn't a lot of grassroots organizers and students and teachers and parents don't have really a lot of say in what is going on in schools, and that has created a lot of bad things, especially because the administration right now in New York City, it sounds like it's similar in Texas. These people just do not care about what is best for students.
Benji, is it being framed though in New York? Because this seems like a very uniquely conservative state or Southern thing, but maybe it's not. Everything here is put under this nice banner of parental rights. And so the parents have the rights to know. And so we're honoring the parents' rights. Is that framing used in New York as well?
From what I've seen, not really. And I think it's because it kind of sounds like there may be different, we're kind of facing different issues in Texas and New York City. I think a lot of the issues in Texas are around kind of those like parents have the right to know kind of things, where it's like very personal things about what's going on with students and kind of students abilities to like choose and control their identities. And in New York City, it's kind of more about larger policies around like curriculum, or policies around funding, or policies around police and schools. And so I think that a lot of what's going on in New York City is being framed kind of more so as just like as one, the people at the top just already have this power because of mayoral control. But there's also an aspect, especially when it comes to like issues of racial segregation, where you have organizations that are arguing that any type of integration that has to do with racial issues is segregationist, or is racist, or is harmful to white students. And so it's a lot of what's going on is a lot of opposition to integration in New York City is kind of being framed as that, where people are making the argument that it's just harmful to white students.
Interesting. And before we move on, are there any other thoughts about representation that people want to share?
I think it's not only seeing people who are like you that is helpful to students. I think it's seeing people who outwardly support you. It can be very heartwarming, and it can make a lot of students feel safe when you walk into a classroom and you see that your teacher has like a flag on the wall, a pride flag, or some sort of sticker on their door that says Black Lives Matter, or literally anything that shows you that your teacher is on your side. It's not only people who are like you, it's people who support you that can make people feel a lot safer in these environments. And when we have policies and things like that that seek to force teachers to take down these flags, take down these stickers, take down these indicators of safety, it can certainly make students feel less safe because now they don't have that indicator that this is a safe place, that this person is a safe person to talk to. It's not just seeing people who are like you, it's seeing people who respect you, people who believe in you, people who are rooting for you.
It's a great point, Cade. An absolutely great point. I'll ask one more time if there's any other contributions to this topic.
I'll just add that in terms of curriculum, I think representation is just also us asking for the whole truth, right? Like our curriculum, a lot of it has been, they're just lies, right? From a very Eurocentric and biased point of view. And so wanting to have a curriculum that's representative of the student body is not, is literally just students asking for the truth.
I really appreciate that. So what resources would really help a school feel more inclusive and more welcoming to make it more of a truly integrated experience for students? And I mean, resources could be anything from counselors to better teacher pay to making sure that we're not doing all online instruction. Just thoughts on any of that?
I think that, while I was a student at KDISD, I noticed that the majority of lessons that were taught during Black History Month about Black history, or any month of like representation or history of a marginalized community, that any content or any lessons that were given to us were majority made by the teachers themselves. It's not required, it's not state sponsored curriculum for the most part. The majority of lessons that we've had about Black history, Hispanic heritage, or any type of history of marginalized people, it's given to us by teachers who care, by teachers who put in the work to honor these people, honor these parts of history. And unless you're taking like an African American studies or like Hispanic heritage history classes, you're not going to get that education, when it feels like this education, which is this knowledge, this history that is vital to our country, how our country was made on the backs of immigrants and slaves and people of color who worked. It feels like a lot of that history is just swept under the rug unless you go specifically looking for it by enrolling in an African American studies or some sort of history course that focuses on that sort of thing. A lot of the content highlighting people from marginalized communities are handpicked, handmade by the teachers who shouldn't necessarily have to take it upon themselves to make the content for us to learn, when I feel like that should be a part of the state-sponsored curriculum, is learning about these people who were monumentally important. They were incredibly important to the creation of our country.
Great point. Other thoughts?
I think for me, what's really missing that we need, right, to have integrated schools is not only youth voice, like letting young people be part of the table, but letting young people and students make decisions about their schools. Yeah, like I feel like at any time that I'm in a conversation with students, and even when I was a student, right, like of course, like you're not gonna know like the system in and out, and why you need to work alongside with adults and officials and administrations, right? But like students have the answers, but students are often shut out from the conversations that they need to. And when they want to report something or they want to have a conversation about something, there's nowhere to turn to, and there's a lot of information that is hidden from students, so that students don't even really know what's going on or how they can change things in their schools. So I think transparency to students about what's going on in their schools, about what is possible, and then letting young people decide and make decisions, important decisions about their schooling. And I think connected to that, right, is funding. Like Benji mentioned, every year there's like millions, billions of money taken out of the education budget for New York City. Pre-pandemic, when the 5 Rs was like accepted into as like a blueprint, a citywide blueprint to integrate schools, right? Like there, along that time as well, there was like $23 million. I think it was a big number that was that was going to be allocated for teacher training, for teacher culturally responsive and relevant training, and then that money just went nowhere. Like literally nobody knows where that money went. And so like if we don't have the money, right, if we don't have the funding, if we don't have the youth voice, then I feel like those are very needed in order to see change happen.
Yeah, transparency and knowledge are definitely resources. Other thoughts?
I just wanted to add to what Annette said, because the field that I work in is basically focused on intergenerational partnerships for justice. And I wrote a book with two women who do intergenerational work. And we talk in the book about all the things Annette was saying, such as having youth on the school boards, or youth as organizers, or youth as curriculum writers, which some of this sounds so pie in the sky, but it's actually happening in the country. Maybe not in Houston, but in little pockets, it is happening. So I think that restorative justice that's intergenerational, and our book is called The Little Book of Youth Engagement, but any kind of restorative justice that's authentically interested in dismantling oppressive systems and is not just about conflict resolution as a way to disrupt the school to prison pipeline, I think that's a resource. And I think SEL in general for teachers and for students. So there's something called Fuel Ed that actually comes out of Houston, and they train nationally. And it's helping teachers learn about what our attachment styles are, so we can understand emotionally what our triggers are or what our motivations are, so that we can be better secure attachment figures for our students, so that every student in the building has at least one adult who they feel that connection to. So I think Fuel Ed, that was very transformative in my training as a teacher. And then also adding on, I don't know if it was Annette, you were talking about the cultural competency in the curriculum, right? And this has just been true for, well, I'm in my late 40s. So over 20 years is just the lack of representation in the curriculum and who's writing the curriculum. And Kate is right. Like, we're given curriculum, but then all of a sudden, when it comes to culturally relevant curriculum, now teachers have autonomy and we have to do everything on our own. So I think it's really important. When I was in high school, I had to memorize all the wives of Henry VIII who were beheaded in order. But then they put Africa, India, and China in my world history class in one chapter. Mm-hmm. So I feel like things like that are still continuing. And I feel like it's really important to innovate and make the curriculum happen if it's not there.
I have a few things to add. When I was listening to you all, I thought about those closest to the problem or closest to the solution. And so for me, coming from a community organizer standpoint, and working with nonprofits and creating mentorship programs, for me, I think that it's important for us to integrate the community into the schools as well. Like, we need to so teachers and parents and faculty members aren't feeling alone, as if when they do want to stand on business or they want to uphold, new policies, procedures, they have the support from the community, because community power is in the community. We need to be able to rely on each other in order for us to, have refuge. And because the jargon you all understand, parents and some community members aren't aware, which is why I don't think that their presence is as it should be in schools when we talk about representation and what it really looks like to have real integration. And that means, in my opinion, in the community. The schools are in the community. Our children are in the community. When they leave and go home, they're back in their communities. So it's not only just the school's responsibility. The community needs to have some type of accountability and responsibility to our children, because we're all, in this ecosystem system together. So to me, that means that, teaching parents what it's really like to have parental rights, teaching our youth and introducing them into mentors who look and peers who look like them, who understand them, who can help rally with them and teach them, different strategies in order to advocate for themselves in schools. Because you don't really just wake up an activist, or you don't wake up a person like knowing what to do. These are learned traits that come from individuals that, like Malcolm X or different organizations that we've known who've done the work in integrated schools and who have, plenty of, examples that we can follow. But I think that it's important for us to stand together in empowerment and empower each other in the community. Is it super important for our youth to feel like they can come to anyone? I think that that's great that teachers want to understand youth and want to be their support, but that's what counselors are for. That's what mentors are for. That's what individuals in the community are for, that, or, that after school programs, those are things are also to help build community and build strength and power in numbers. And I think that we need to definitely uplift and welcome restorative justice practices, or individuals who create curriculums, organizations like Houston in Action, organizations who I know of like Collective Action for Youth, who actually hire young individuals who have lived experience like myself, have been in foster care, have exited the system, have been to college, have created curriculums, have all this experience to give to youth, instead of overworking our teachers who are also human beings and need support as well, which I think is adding to the mental health crisis and the mental health. We have the means of support. We have credible messengers. Like, we have individuals that are in Chicago that have implemented things that are helping our youth identify themselves and helping them become more aware of policies and procedures. We have organizations whom I work with, like Young Invincibles, who are in colleges teaching students about how to become more advocates for health care, and how teaching women about abortions in Texas, and teaching them about different things on how to, have their own voices and create a city. If no one just welcome you to the table, you can create your own table. It's important for our youth to have and be empowered with their own voice, but to know that their parents, their faculty, and in their community is in refuge with them as well. And we're gonna rally together. I think that's important.
Yeah, using the community as a resource, thinking of community as a resource opportunity is an important thing to include in that aspect. And so I want to go back to something that multiple of you have said in your answers to that previous question, which is restorative justice. And Anita, not to pick on you too much, but I know you have a deep interest in restorative justice. So I'm wondering if you could, define it for us and tell us a little bit about its importance in school. And then I'd love to open it up to the rest of you guys to kind of talk about the role restorative justice could play in making sure schools are more integrated and welcoming.
Yeah, to start off with, the way that I would define it is that it is a philosophy. It comes from indigenous peoples. It was not, invented by academics or the criminal justice system, but it's a philosophy that focuses on the fact that we are all interconnected, and that we are intentional, relational beings, and that when harm happens, it ripples out and affects all of us. And that to repair harm for true accountability, all voices should be at the table, the people who are impacted, so that you can collectively come up with agreements to repair the harm. And so that is what we try to do in the schooling. One thing that we did in the program at the prior school I was at, and my restorative justice coordinator position no longer exists. And that's how I am now teaching English, which I really enjoy, but my passion is restorative justice. So in this program, students would join a leadership class, and it wasn't for people who were leaders in any one definition. It was basically, you had to have social, emotional intelligence, competencies, maturity to be able to hold confidential information, to be able to deal with conflict, advocate, things like that. And then we would be a lab to help develop those leadership skills. Kind of like what Angel was saying, you don't already have the skills to do certain things. So we were there to bring that and into the conversation through the peace circle process, where we're all seated in a circle. We have a talking piece. Whoever has it has the honor to speak. If you don't, you have the honor to listen. And we do question rounds, and every day we would do mindfulness. And I mean, speaking to what Angel said, yes, we need all the help from counselors and after school and whatever. But at the end of the day, like, we also have to be that first, regulated person, right? So this was just a really good way to incorporate that into the classroom. We do a check-in. The students would facilitate the circles. And then every Friday, they would go and facilitate circles with all the ninth graders in the school. And the whole school would be in circle on Fridays during the advisory period. And they would write the circle topics. They would say, well, we really need to talk about mental health, or here's an issue we want to talk about. And so I would teach them how to write the scripts. And then also it was taught by students. So we would have like a head teaching assistant who would work with me. And then I would coach them to help other teachers in the class, other young people who had taken the class before, to write the lessons. So it was an organizing model of passing on restorative justice. And then I would take them out in the community to do trainings with social organizations or anyone really who's interested, other schools in the district, so that they could see this is a process that's used not just in schools, but my mentor, her son was murdered in Massachusetts, and she met with one of the men and created agreements with him. And that was part of her healing process, because the court process was actually more victimizing. The person who actually killed her son got off, and his family celebrated in the courtroom. So just having them learn about, here's a different ways this is incorporated, and we create an alternative to in-school suspension. Like, okay, if you're going to take a kid out of a classroom, can you make that space therapeutic? So they would run that space as well. So they would do check-ins with the students, mindfulness. They would pull homework from the teachers. And so I'm talking a lot, I'll stop. But that is what a community of care, that was the idea, a community of care and accountability to each other. And they would also do it for conflicts within the school, or if a class was like pretty dysfunctional and there wasn't a good culture, they would go and do circles to help reset the culture.
Thank you for that explanation. So like I said, I'm just wondering kind of how restorative justice can really contribute to creating a more welcoming, inclusive environment according to all of you.
I actually have hosted a healing circle with youth that were currently in an RTC, which is Residential Treatment Center in the state of Texas, with the mentorship program that we created. And it was so moving, you all. Like the amount of like information that once you ground the space and you let everyone know that they're safe there, I think that it's incredible to build a bond and a connection between individuals who like wouldn't normally have a conversation or be open and transparent about their experiences. I think that with willing and able individuals who are like willing to be transparent, it could be a transformative experience for everyone, the teachers, the school, just to have a conflict resolution or a way to relieve your stress and communicate with your peers in a way that seems like it's actually restorative and it's helping you build and actually have some type of real connection and actually get solutions from those things and make sure that youth voice are feeling uplifted. Our talking stick, we let the youth use, which they usually chose like a toy or something like that. Just something like that to start and ground the room, which is really important. We did one where we actually had them bring their own talking stick and use that as an opportunity to ground the space, where this is whenever you're not only here, you're taking this and the energy from everyone, and it's with you when you're no longer here. So if you're feeling like you need a safe space, you can create that wherever you are with whomever. So I think what's important for me is to equip our community and our youth to have their own skills, to have their own restorative justice, right? We have to teach them so that each one teach one. And so they can use that. And whenever they're having their own quarrels with their peers, they have their own tools to level the playing field and to understand each other.
Fantastic. Other thoughts?
I went to a middle school that was very restorative justice based and really focused on community. It was a very small middle school. I think I had like 90 kids in my class. So it was very small. It was based on restorative practices, and the school put a lot of effort into funding guidance counselors and other counselors to work with students. And the whole environment was really based on community and restorative practices, and it was really beautiful. And it was a great space to be in and to learn in, and the aspects of collaboration and community were things that really attracted me to the school. And now I go to a high school with like 4,000 students, and the the school doesn't really prioritize guidance counselors or social workers. There's and so we don't really have um, those aspects of community or those restorative practices really instilled in the school environment. And instead, it's the school is really focused on test scores and testing and AP classes. And so it's kind of like, instead of going to a school that is focused on really building students and their entire selves, and really focusing on having students that are really into community, and making change together and working with each other. It my school kind of creates this very individualistic and competitive environment in which the school is just trying to pump out test scores, and kids who are competitive and take tests, and are trying to get a higher test score than the student next to them. And it's not really about community, and it's not really about like guidance counselors or social workers or having students work with each other, and having them work to improve their communities and be change makers in their communities. And so I feel like there's again a really big difference between like my two experiences between middle school and high school. And I think that a lot of it has to do with class sizes and what we prioritize in schools, and really the way that we see schools. And I wish that more schools today were seen as places that could produce students who really are collaborative and really are change makers, instead of just students who are pumping out test scores and basically robots.
No, Benji, you raise a great point that actually talks about that integration. Where we talked, Naya earlier talked about the fact that these resolutions need to be holistic, because in order to be able to do restorative justice, you need the resources and the funding to be able to support teachers and make class sizes smaller and all of them. And it's a lot, but it's important. Any other thoughts on restorative justice and the impact it can have on schools?
Kate, I'd be curious about your boyfriend's perspective, because I teach him now in the same class. But when you were in the class, we had a lot of conflicts, minor, small conflicts. Oh, and Angel, I want to connect with you, by the way. All of these things are very exciting. Transphobic comments or people not understanding pronouns. You know what I'm talking about, before you left. And I feel like I have been doing circles as an English teacher, and it's very against the culture of the school. It's against standardized testing culture, and it's a lot of work, but it's the only thing that got me through the year, and to not walk off the job mid-year. Does Prince feel like there's what I'm saying is, I feel like, because we talk about belonging, and I know I agree with everything that Benji and Annette are saying, and with the policymakers here, they would think that we're, I guess, revolutionaries, that we're CRT, DEI. They'd use all the labels for what we're trying to do in schools to create agents of change. And I remember one student in my first period class, when he saw the seating chart, he came up to me and was like, "Can you change it? I can't sit there against my religion." And I was like, "What is he talking about?" I was like, "What is it?" And it's because there was a queer student, like an openly queer student at his table. So I'm just like, okay, I want the student to feel as if he also belongs, but I also am like want to throw up right now and all of these things. So I have to hold that tension, especially in a pretty conservative state. Like, I have to love all the kids, right? But you can't be transphobic in this space, period. So I feel like circles have created a sense of understanding and acceptance a little bit more. And I'm wondering, Kate, have you heard anything like that? Or do other people in your circles, have you seen that, where even like different political ideologies, things that could create difference, that people become a little more integrated and connected?
I think that the approach that a lot of schools are taking is I feel like it's well intentioned for a lot of them, but it's just not helpful. I feel like when we walk into class and it's advisory time and they're like, instead of giving you time to study, we're going to sit here and talk about why we should be nice to each other. it comes off as well intentioned. It's an attempt to build community in school, but at the same time, for a lot of kids, it's not that they don't know how to be nice to each other, they just don't want to. I think instead of telling people how to be nice to each other, we should tell people why they should be nice to each other instead of how. I think when we give reasons why respecting community is a good thing to do rather than just you should respect community, it definitely helps. And I feel like a lot of teachers who do like circle time, again, not many who there's not many teachers who attempt to build community in their classroom. uh, those who attempt to build community at all are already one step ahead of everyone else. But I feel like the teachers who do attempt to build community through like circle time or campfire or whatever they feel like calling it, a way to work out emotions and make friends, build community, instead of going through why students should respect each other, uh, they simply go to you should and not why you should. Again, it's not that students don't know how to be nice, it's that a lot of students who hold these bigoted ideologies and bully and harass students of marginalized and minority groups, they hold these they hold these bigoted ideologies, and I feel like instead of just saying be nice to each other, we should teach them why these bigoted ideologies are not okay to express in these safe spaces and how they affect their fellow students.
Great, thank you. And so I think the last question I have for you all, this has been a great winding conversation, is integration worth it? Can we do it? Why hasn't Brown v. Board, the seminal case that's 70 years old now, we've been talking about integration for at least 70 years in an open and concentrated way. Why haven't we seen the change, and can we make the change, and is it worth making the change? It's a big question, I know.
I feel like integration is certainly worth it in the event where we can achieve total integration. Unfortunately, I feel like we're at a point in this country where full integration will not be something we achieve anytime soon, especially due to the rise of people stating their bigoted political beliefs out in the open. I feel like pre 2016, a lot of people, if they had these bigoted opinions, they'd keep them to themselves. But after 2016, a lot of people who hold these bigoted beliefs are saying the quiet part out loud or being a lot more open about their dislike or disgust towards marginalized communities. I feel like now that people are displaying these ideologies and showing to other people, oh, it's okay that I think this way, that it's leading to a rise in people having these bigoted opinions, where I feel like throughout history, we've been getting better towards public opinion, the society's public opinion on marginalized communities, where we're getting less and less racist and less transphobic and homophobic and ableist. Recently, we've been going back down towards the entirety of our country seeming to be going backwards at the moment towards going back towards these racist ideologies, going back towards these homophobic, transphobic, ableist, what have you, ideologies. I feel like that is certainly going to make things a lot harder, and I feel like complete integration is not something we'll be able to achieve anytime soon, but that does not mean that it is not worth it. We certainly need to fight for our right to belong, our right to these resources, our right to this representation and restorative justice. We need to fight for our our future. We need to fight for the future generations. We need to fight for our ability to have brighter days ahead. I feel like it is certainly worth it to work towards integration, even if it's not something that we can achieve anytime soon.
I love that instinctually you went less racist, less homophobic with the arm going up automatically.
Well, yes, because less racist is good.
Yes.
Yes.
It makes obvious sense, but I love that it was the absolute visual that you created. Other thoughts on that question?
In my opinion, I think that folks are like, integration in theory is great until it started to put into practice and start implementing into schools. Then we see like the foundations of our systems is cracked, and it's not as easy to integrate because the systems are already racist. The things that the barriers that we need to that we've been acting like are not there, they become so much, more prominent in our face. And so I think, for me, when it comes to like actually implementing the things, once we create all these recommendations and we create these things and policies and restorative practices that we know will work, a part of integration is integrating them into schools with like-minded individuals who are open to actually practicing them, implementing them, developing the curriculums, doing the things that need to be done in order to break down the system in which we know is racist. So I think that was a part of my ideology when I enrolled my son into a more representative charter school, right? For him to see himself every day. Thinking that would make him feel more welcomed and more, and more motivated to learn. And it kind of did the opposite. He's like, I don't like the school at all. I would rather go somewhere else. And to me, just offer small things like people not understanding, like, just making fun of him for, just anything. And also just like when I think about racism in America, I'm not as shocked about the things that are happening outwardly now, because I've been Black all my life. I've been raised in Texas all my life. I've experienced racism at school, outside of school, at the grocery stores. So to me, it's not as appalling as it would be to someone who hasn't like had those experiences, which is why I'm such an advocate for just awareness and understanding of your Black history and representation of yourself, because in this, we're in America, so we have to expect things when we're in another man's land, in my opinion. So I think that for us, it's good for us to continue to have these conversations, for us to equip our youth and our communities with the information that they need to make them more powerful, for them to understand, and for us to create more spaces where we're welcomed and where we can do the necessary work, for us to become more involved in policies and for us to be more involved in voting and things that actually affect our community and help us move forward, in spaces where we need to be, in my opinion.
I just have to jump in and say yes to all of it, because I feel like Angel's talking about integration in a very nuanced, particular way, which is not racial integration is key. I think integrating the resources of the community and the knowledge of the community, to me, that's more important than having a racial balance or having all schools have um, a representation of people and we're busing like they did in Boston with a Metco. Like, yes, I do think diversity is very important, but to me, it's less important than integrating all the wealth and the knowledge and the expertise, the resources of the community into the school.
I think, yes, change is always worth it. And I think it's important to realize and remember that the systems that exist and that we exist in today are actually working exactly as they were created and intended to work, right? And so I think it's crucial to think outside of the box when we think about like what is integration, and it's not really about fixing a school or fixing a structure, because there is no fixing it. It's working as it should be. Like, schools were not made so to make actually anyone with a difference, right, like feel included or feel safe in the school. And so yeah, I think like when we're thinking about like what integration means, or when we're thinking about the future, it really should be about like building something new and not thinking about like, oh, how do we fix this thing that exists now, because it's working exactly as it was intended to work.
Thank you for that. Any other thoughts? Final thoughts? Okay. Thank you all so much for that conversation. I want to open it up now and see if we have any questions from people who have been involved in listening today. So this is deeply moving, informed, and intelligent conversation. Amazing panel and passionate and effective professionals and communicators. You all are all of those things.
Could I ask Annette a question?
Go for it.
Teacher, can I ask a question? Sorry, you said it's a conversation, not. Annette, can you talk about, you were doing this activism since high school, from what I understood. Is that correct? And then now you're in college organizing. Is that right?
No, I'm not in college anymore. I'm 25 years old now. So I've been doing it since I was 17. Yeah. But I would say youth activism all my life.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious about what sparked you're kind of like such a great example of what we would want. Well, all of you. I mean, Benji, Cade, Angel, you turned out great. Like I turned out great too. We're fine. But what was it that inspired you? Because you've been doing it for so many years, in your 20s, I guess, or like advice for Cade or Benji or to adults who are trying to work intergenerationally with young people for social education.
I guess like what inspired me to start off with that question is that I think I'm Ecuadorian. I lived in Ecuador until I was like 7 years old, and then I moved here. And then I think throughout my entire life, like both like culturally and also within the systems, right? Like the colonized systems, right? Like the youth voice didn't matter, and like in one of the trainings that my team and I do, it's like one of the questions that we ask before we start is like, what is like a belief that you grew up with about young people? And a lot of people say like something along the lines of like young people should be seen and not heard. And so like I think that's what really that's how I felt growing up, right? And that I could only be seen but I could not be heard, and that like my voice as a young person didn't matter until I magically reached like a certain age, and then like I could be part of like adult conversations and all of that stuff. And so I think that's what pushed me like to be like an advocate as a young person, and then for young people, right? Not only within the school system. And I think in terms of advice for intergenerational spaces and building intergenerational spaces, there's a lot. And I think it's not easy, right? But I think that's the important part, that like maybe like there should be time and space dedicated to that, and that work is about community building and trust building. A lot of the times adults feel like they need to protect young people, which like adults should be there to guide young people, right? And like what you learn, like you should be able to like talk about and let it maybe be a guide for other young people, but it's not necessarily about protecting and like hiding information from young people, right? And that's why like I emphasize the importance of transparency in terms of information for young people, because how are they supposed to be making decisions if they don't know, if they don't really know what's going on, right? And so I think trust building is really important, would be like my main, like I guess advice, like focus on trust building, and know that that takes time, right? That doesn't happen in a meeting or two meetings or even within a month or a year, right? Like that is ongoing work. And I think that's what's beautiful about it, because you're really building a relationship and a friendship with the person that you're working with. But yeah, I feel like Benji and Kate like could also answer that, right, in your relationships with adults, and just like in your work and advocacy that you've been doing. Yeah, I wonder like also like like what are your thoughts around that?
It definitely feels like on a lot of issues, adults seem to think that students and youth in general have no idea what they want and what they need, when for years youth have been attempting to advocate for themselves and have just been told to sit down and shut up, go sit back at the kiddie table, we have stuff figured out. And then we look at the world and we see, wow, these people really don't have stuff figured out. And we tell them what we need, and we tell them what resources can help us, what we advocate for ourselves, we tell them what things will help us succeed, and they go back to doing exactly what they have been doing for years, which is screwing stuff up.
Yeah, I agree. I recently I've dealt with ageism for so many years. And it comes up a lot even in like the spaces I've been in with adults who are trying to do the same work. And it also comes up a lot in my own school. Like I recently wrote an op-ed and sent it to my principal because it was about something that I felt was going on in my school around standardized testing and AP courses. And he like emailed me and invited me to his office. And then he was like, "Oh, this, your op-ed was so great." He wanted to like take a picture with me and post it to the school's Instagram. But he wasn't actually interested in like what I had to say and ideas that I might have had around the school. Like he didn't invite me to, actually discuss policy changes in the school, or to actually work with him or other school officials around, to make the changes that I talked about in my op-ed. So it was like that was an example of tokenization. And he wanted to like take a picture with me and be like, "Oh, this is so great, here are what our students are doing," but he didn't actually want to work with me. He didn't actually care about what I had to say or about my experiences. So I think that happens a lot, and there's so much ageism that still has to be worked through.
Yeah, thank you all for those answers. We do have one more question before we get to our wrap up, and that is, can you share a moment or experience from your school life that made you feel either included or excluded based on your background or identity? And how did this experience shape your view on what truly welcoming and inclusive school environments should look like?
This is my go-to story that I always find myself going back to when I think about my experiences with racism or homophobia or any type of uh, persecution in my school career. And even though this was a private preschool, that I still remember this, it's burned into my brain. Um, I feel like it really goes to show the lack of education that a lot of especially white majority communities tend to have towards people of color, people of other marginalized groups. Is when I was in preschool, no one would let me sit with them for lunch because I was the only kid in my class who didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. And they asked me what happened to me and what was wrong with me and why do I look like that. And to this day, I'm convinced I'm probably the first Black person those kids had ever seen in their life. But every time I think about like racism and other forms of bigotry in the school system, that's what I think about. Is for a lot of these kids, even in high school, they are simply like not well educated. Even if there are kids who are racist or transphobic or homophobic, and it's likely because they take after their parents. A lot of these kids in these school systems have these opinions because they've seen those opinions displayed throughout their childhood. Um, they are uneducated on certain types of people, certain communities, certain aspects of life, which is why they turn to these hostile words or actions, is because they are afraid of what they don't understand, and they are they don't like being confused. So if they can get rid of the people who make them feel confused, then they don't have to confront their own biases and their own bigotry that they've grown up with. If they can bully people until they drop out of school, or if they can push these people out of their lives, they never have to confront those things about themselves. And that's really stuck with me my entire life, is that situation, because I feel like one of the first steps towards dismantling someone's bigotry, or just even society as a whole dismantling bigotry, is education. I feel like a lot of the people who feel this way about marginalized groups of people simply feel this way because they are uncomfortable with the idea that they don't know everything. And so if they don't know it, then clearly the other people must be wrong. If they don't understand the psychology and science that comes with being trans, the evidence that shows that being trans is a real thing, or shows that gay people are actually like gay and science backs that up. If they don't understand that science, then clearly it must be the gay people that are lying, or the trans people who are lying in their eyes. And they don't have to confront the fact that they don't know everything if they push those people away and never have to see them again. And I feel like that's what happens with a lot of students in the school system who have these opinions are uncomfortable with seeing people who aren't like them, is because they were never properly educated on these types of people in these different communities. Their default is, "You get that away from me."
Thank you for sharing that, Cade.
There's this quote that I forgot how it exactly goes, but it's along the lines of like, you must know where you're from to know where you're going. And I always think about it because I like in every school that I've been part of, right? Like since coming to this country, like I remember going, like social studies was one of my favorite topics, and like I would always go to the back to the index part of the textbook and I would look for Ecuador, and either it would not be there, or like there would be like one little section and then a whole page about it, right, within that whole textbook. And so throughout my schooling experience, like I didn't know where I was from. I didn't know where I came from, apart maybe from like the traditions that my family carried with them, right? And I didn't have my first Latin teacher until I was in ninth grade. And so I think all of that, like, you know, we talk about the importance of representation, and like honestly, like when I was younger, when I was a student, like in elementary school, middle school, up until high school, right, like I didn't even know the importance of that or what I was missing because I literally never had it. And then I you know, I had my first Latin teacher, and she was also Ecuadorian, and that like opened a whole new world of me for knowing, for just knowledge, right, on like where I'm from, because we used to have like a Hispanics club after school, and she like finally convinced me to join because I did not want to stay after school. But like once I finally joined, like she would spend that time teaching us our history, and that was like really like so powerful for me, and like that started my journey of doing my own research on my ancestors and where I'm from, right? And I think you don't really know how much of a difference it is and how much of an impact it has on you until like you go through them.
Thank you so much, Annette. So we're really close to the end, but I don't want to cut anybody off who had a moment they wanted to tell about that, an experience they wanted to share. So I will leave it open for that. Okay. Well, if not, thank you all panelists so much for everything, to Annette, Angel, and Anita. I was like, wait a minute, did I say that one already? Annette, Angel, Anita, Cade, and Benji. You guys have been amazing. You really provided a lot of food for thought for me, and I'm sure everybody else who was listening in. It's such an important conversation. We at Appleseed will be continuing this conversation in various ways. New York Appleseed will have a toolkit that they will be releasing to encourage community conversations and remind people that there are a lot of resources that they have been working on around integration that already exist, and how to go go ahead and move forward in thinking about implementing the 5 R's and having community conversations around integration. Appleseed Network will also have a toolkit that will help to create more spaces like this one and how you can do that. And then the Texas Appleseed report on Beaumont will also be released this summer after the end of May, that will really discuss all of the ways that Beaumont kind of looks currently, how it's looked historically, what it could look like in the future if we're able to move forward. And we are going to be able to move forward. Like all of you said, the fight is worth it. Let's move forward. Let's keep moving for a welcoming and inclusive environment for all students across this nation. We invite you to reach out to us at the various Appleseeds that are involved. And we thank you so much for your time and your interest today.